Hey guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. So for today's flick picks, I decided on a movie that I actually enjoyed watching quite a bit as well. I mean, most of the movies I pick are the ones that I've always watched. And, this one's no exception. And it's a classic Steve Martin flick called Roxanne. Now, I didn't really know much of the background to this story when I watched it as a kid. I mean, this came out in '87, so I was quite young, and I always enjoyed it. I don't know what it is about it. It's just the story itself. And as I've watched it again, and I've watched it again, just as recently as the other day from when I'm filming this, I actually watched it. There's a lot of things that I was noticing that obviously I didn't notice when I was a kid, or, things I started to think about. And one of the things was, like, why did I always wonder what this story, like, how did they come up with the storyline and all? Why the weird things that go on? So, if you haven't seen this before, essentially, it's Steve Martin's character. His name is, I've wrote it down, C.D. Bales, and he's a firefighter. He's a chief of volunteer firefighters in a small town. They made a fictional town for this, so and actually it was shot in Canada in BC, but it's supposed to take place in America somewhere. And so he's got this unusually long nose. And that was one of the things that I always like, why? Why did they do that? The thought is like, okay, he's supposed to be somebody who's got this really great personality, really great guy, really fun to be around, but something really awkward about him, and it's his nose. So, and of course, you see in the beginning of the movie, he comes out of his house. You don't notice the nose right away because he's staring right on the camera. He goes down a hill. You still don't see the nose. You see him walking down the street. And it isn't until two people that are practically drunk walk by and kind of make a comment at him, and that's when you actually see the nose. So Steve Martin's character in this one, he's kind of a guy who's, he's living his life. He's happy, but he's single. And he meets this girl, Roxanne, who moves into a kind of a temporary situation, kind of renting a house of actually the main character's, Steve Martin's friend. And so he's very familiar with the house. He's very familiar with, the fact that I guess it got rented out. And so he starts to see this girl in town, and he starts to get interested in her. Her name's Roxanne. And she's played by Daryl Hannah, so he's obviously attracted to her, but at the same time, he realizes, like, I got this ginormous nose, and no one's going to like this nose. And so the main story begins when a new recruit comes into the fire hall, and it's a charming young guy, but he has a hard time talking to the ladies. So that's really where the premise comes in, is that Daryl Hannah's character falls in love with this guy who's young and attractive, and it's got all the looks, but when it comes to his personality, he's not very good. He can't charm a lady. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just literally there for the looks. And Steve Martin's character, who starts to fall in love with Daryl Hannah's character, is all about the charm and everything else. So he's got everything that she actually wants in a man, but he's got a big nose. And so that's where the movie pretty much centers around. You got some interesting characters. I mean, all the firefighters that, come into the scene, all different actors from the 80s that you'd probably recognize if you watch a lot of 80s movies, a lot of 80s TV shows. So there's, little bumblings going on about that. But the interesting thing is, like, I personally didn't really know that this was based on an actual play, an actual story. And this is what I'm starting to actually learn now that I'm looking at these films that I've always watched as a kid, always wondered where they got the ideas from, like, how did they come up with this stuff? And I'm starting to realize that a lot of it is kind of borrowed from previous either works of fiction, plays, cinema, whatever. It's often borrowed from something else. It's kind of like what we're doing today in 2019, where you see a lot of things are reboots and redos and all that stuff. And movies are, people are saying things like, oh, there's no more creativity. They're always borrowing things from the 80s. But it's interesting that in the 80s, they were borrowing things from the past as well. So this is what I'm starting to notice. And in fact, even Steve Martin's other film, which I have talked about, is The Three Amigos, another favorite of mine. Again, a story that I always wondered when I watched it, how did they come up with such a brilliant story? But turns out it was borrowed from a previous movie. So this one's no exception. Only this one was actually a play that was written back in 1897. I'm going to try to say the name because it's a French thing. Cyrano de Bergerac. I probably said that wrong. And it probably requires an accent of some sort. I'm not French at all. But anyways, that's the play. Now, there was some movies done. There was actually an old movie in like the 20s. There was one in the 30s, which was really just a filming of the play. People doing the play, and it was filmed. So that would be an early kind of screening type of movie. And then there was another one after this movie, after Roxanne, which took place in 1990. And this, well, it didn't take place in 1990. It was filmed in 1990. And it's based on the original storyline, because the original storyline is in like the 17th century, but it's the same concept. The person's got a big nose, finds himself unattractive because of his nose. He goes after a girl named Roxanne, and it's the same thing with a friend who, sorry, it was not a friend. He's in it's more of an army situation. Obviously, the firefighter thing was changed, but he's more of in the army, and this guy was underneath them, and he was the charming-looking guy, and so he was stuck in this. Do I help him go after his romance, or does he try and do it himself, knowing that he's got this awful nose? Now, it's not as big of a nose that I could tell from what I've looked at the old, screenings and stuff like that. It's kind of like a little bit smaller. Like Steve Martin's is a lot more accentuated, but I guess they did that on purpose. They really wanted you to see that this nose was long. But and the other thing that is the original storyline, that Roxanne was actually the guy's cousin. So I guess, in the past, this was kind of a normal thing to fall in love with your cousin or something. So that was obviously changed. So what Steve Martin looked at was he from what I've read on IMDb, is that he really enjoyed this play when he was a kid. He really enjoyed the story when he was a kid. It really moved him. And it was something that he wanted to always kind of, I guess, adapt into a film. And when it came to the point where he got that opportunity, he was looking for something that could be funny, that could work out to be funny. And going back to the 17th century with, the way they did things, the way they spoke, it would have been very difficult for him to really get the comedy across. So he decided to take the exact storyline and just flip it into, the 1980s, which is what he did with, or what they did with Three Amigos, essentially. All the other movies, they kind of take the meat of the story and just kind of build a new one around it, using the same kind of morals and the same kind of lesson that you learn in the film, without having to actually, copy exactly what they did. And this is why probably, people like me didn't know, because it was named Roxanne. This movie was named Roxanne, not Cyrano de Bergerac or whatever. So when you go and look on IMDb, you kind of have to search around to find out where it's inspired by. In fact, I did notice that in the beginning it did say it. In the credits, it did say inspired by the story or something like that, and that's what caught my eye, and that's why I looked into it. Because I always wondered about how they came up with this concept of this guy walking around who's got this long nose and falls in love and gets the other guy to, he essentially teaches the other guy how to woo this woman, and it's a brilliant storyline. Now there's a lot of funny things in there as well that he tosses in that classic Steve Martin, only Steve Martin would pull off. Like some of my favorite parts are in the beginning when when he first meets Roxanne, just before he meets Roxanne, I should say, he's walking around the town, and he's doing his crazy things. He's jumping around, he's acting crazy. He goes to a newspaper box, puts a coin in, pulls the paper out, starts reading it, then he screams, turns around, grabs his money, puts it back in, opens up the box, throws the paper back in, and just calmly walks away. And there's a few other scenes, like the Daryl Hannah's character, the way they meet. She actually gets locked out of her house, and by doing so, she gets her house coat caught in the door and pulls away, and she's naked. So she goes to the fire hall to ask for help, hiding behind the bushes, obviously. And he comes out and he's like, "Why are you naked?" kind of thing, or, do you need a coat? And she's like, sarcastically says, "No, I'd rather just walk around naked." So he's like, "Oh, okay, I'll go get my tools." And so later on, you see them walking, and she's like, "What, did nobody have a coat?" And he's like, "Well, you said you didn't need a coat." So obviously the irony was missed. And then, there's a few other, hits and misses kind of jokes that you kind of get throughout the film. A lot of the big nose jokes. There's a scene in the bar where this guy tries to make fun of him by calling him a big nose. And of course, he's just like, "Big nose? That's like the best thing you can come up with. I got this big thing on my face, and all you can come up with is big nose." So to retaliate, he kind of literally pumps out like 20, which I think it ends up being about 24 insults that are way better than Big Nose. And of course, the guy is just like, you asshole, and he punches. And Steve Martin in this movie, it's another thing that's odd about him is that he can fight. Like he's like a I don't know if it's like karate or jiu-jitsu or something, but he can kick butt like big time. Like he just beats everybody up that makes fun of his nose, which makes like pretty much everybody who knows him frightened to say anything about it. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I mean, the movie's quite well done. The story, I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's like the comedy that you laugh all the way through, but there is some great parts. Like there is, if you're really into that Steve Martin slapstick style of comedy, it's not the same style of comedy you'd get from like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, or some of the other comedies where he's, with other comedians that makes it even funnier, right? So it's just, it kind of draws out a little bit, but there's also a romantic story that goes on throughout the film, which kind of blends nicely together. So it's not entirely romantic, and it's not entirely comedy. So I think it worked pretty well. Anyways, yeah, that was just my thoughts. I just wanted to talk about it because I just saw the movie again, and I was like, really, it's just been a while since I've seen it. I'm pretty sure I have it on not DVD, VHS, somewhere in my mess over there. But something I would have probably watched a long time ago. So it was really nice pulling it out and watching it again, and then doing a little bit of research, and then being able to talk about it. Anyways, let me know what you think. Drop some comments down below if you've seen it, or if you've heard of it, or if you now want to see it. And if you do, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. Or even if you have seen it before, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. Anyways, hope you liked the video. Hope you subscribe. Talk to you later.